the visual artist. And for some of them, that visual component really gives them a chance to approach the subject matter in a way that appeals to them more than, or in a different way than just the text itself. So yeah, I've had students have good responses to it for sure.
If you get a good one, and I don't think all comics, we can all point out like quality, some comics are quality versus others, but some really do a good job of like utilizing the different pieces of the makeup of a comic to do the storytelling and to lead to that bigger stuff. So like, I do teach more than Watchmen, but I'm going to beat that dead horse again really quick. The visuals like almost uncover the lies of the characters at times, or like tell you more about like there's this one panel where like a news vendor is like, I see the signs, I look things in the face, I read the headlines, and they're putting up a nuclear fallout sign like behind him, and he literally doesn't see the sign. And then at the end of the chapter, it's like Dr. Manhattan leaves Earth and everything goes to hell, and he's like totally caught off guard. And we can have this cool conversation about the media and what that means about like that critical study of our media and how they aren't really necessarily tapped into certain things, and maybe it is focused in one way, all through this one panel where the guy who sits with the media all day doesn't see what's going on around, you know.
Oh wow, yeah, that's really cool.
I love that feel, you know.
Yeah.
In March Book 2, the opener, there's a part where John Lewis is talking about spotters, like people who stand outside of the restaurant during the sit-ins, and he looks inside the window, and his hand frames the old look of a police cap, like, and you can't notice it unless you've read it a couple of times or someone has pointed it out to you. And students, it's early on in the comics, like page 3, right? And I pointed out to students, and it kind of forces their hand to like look deeper, right? Like, because they're so surface, right? And I hate to lump them all in together, but many of our students look at what's on the surface and struggle to dig deeper in a way that I think we do, maybe because of the era we grew up in, but naturally we're always looking for the hidden message in everything. And maybe that's because we all are into comics. We want
it's our discipline too, right?
Right?
Like we're diggers, you know.
And we want to get them to think the same thing. And so that those same moments where you can point out teachable moments through something as simple as a comic book, right? Like, just look at this picture, and there's so much to this picture besides the way this image looks, right?
Right. I imagine, like, especially with Watchmen, it's like every time you teach it, you notice something new.
The students, I tell them at the beginning, I'm like, it's kind of an empowering way to like, I'll show you mine here. I pulled it out. I mean, I wrote the book on this comic. Like I could put that together. Like I actually browsed the annotated Watchmen, which is it's a joke because they missed like half the stuff that I think is crucial about the book that you shouldn't miss, right? But I tell them at the time, I'm like, you know, every single time I teach this book, a student at least one student teaches me something new about this book that I didn't see. Like the Gunga Diner, someone brought up like the Gunga Din poem, and I had just like totally blanked on that, and like this cool connection about like what Gunga Din as like an exploited person like means to like the colonizer versus what's happening to the people in the city right around Gunga Din who are used as like fodder for Veidt's plant, and it's just like cool shit that I could see, but I mean, I need that person to see it in a different way than I ever can, right? And they'll point it out, and it's nice, I think, to get that collaboration. And that's like the thing I stress the most is like, you know, this book is not finished. We can all like add our thoughts to this thing, and I'm not the expert.
And just to throw this out there, Aaron, it made me think, like, it seems like those kinds of light bulb moments, and at least in my short experience using graphic novels in the class, like they come up a little bit more than when we're just reading like a novel or a nonfiction piece, right? Like those cool observations, like something about the graphic nature kind of leads them to that, just to those conclusions or to those inferences, you know? more directly.
What do you think what do we think it is? Why is that? I would agree. And I don't know why it maybe is more so in a comic than a novel, you know?
I want to stretch and say, you know, my courses, because I'm labeled as a developmental expert. I have a tremendous number of DSPS students and English language learners in my 100 courses, right? And in my 50 courses. Those particular students often speak to how they feel welcomed by a graphic novel or a comic book, because they're not wordy people. Like they words feel overwhelming to them. They feel stressed out by them, and the comic book feels like a neutral ground for everyone, because in their high schools and middle schools, they're not looking at graphic novels or comic books.
Right.
They'd have to have a really special teacher to be in that space, right?
Yeah.
And or really, you know, eccentric teacher. And so when they come to our space and they see that, they wonder why these educated professionals using graphic or comic books to teach them what's the hidden message in that. And so it amps them up. Like, it gets them really excited that they feel not only welcome, but accepted, and that the unique or the eccentric is okay in this space. And so that's why I think we get a lot of ideas or concepts that are far beyond what we could even believe they should be when we first entered into, like, oh, I'm going to use this comic book and see what they think, right? And they come up with way more than we could even believe they could. And it's a unique experience, I think.
Yeah. So with that, I don't want to, if anyone else has, I just had another thought, or two things actually, and I don't want to dominate. I don't want to talk too much. But like, do you like it? To me, it seems a much richer and deeper experience than in other classes where I've tried to approach it of that like common ground of media, right? Like, not everyone, like you said, is bookish. You know, books in the house might be a rarity in a lot of our students' households when growing up, right? But I think there's something more compelling than, say, like watching a documentary or something. And the other, and part of that maybe is the tactile aspect of it. Like you're saying, if you can get them to buy into the idea of like having the object. So maybe that's something. And the other thing I wanted to touch on while it's fresh in my mind is like that excitement. And I think Aaron, you mentioned you go from Watchmen to like a novel. And I don't know.
Before we do a novel, then we go Watchmen. Watchmen's the end.
Oh, Watchmen's end. But I've structured it where it's like graphic, like sketches, comedy sketches that we analyze, then graphic novel, then book or novel. But it seems like there's a drop off in excitement and engagement when we get to the novel. So I'm wondering if anyone else has experienced that. But you end with the Watchmen, so I
balance them out. Yeah, do a Superman comic for like the very first thing, and then have like novel, play, novel, graphic novel, some poems throughout, you know.
But have you noticed that, any of you, like where it's like graphic novel, everyone seems really pumped, and then we get to the novel and it's maybe a little less enthusiasm? I don't know. Not that it's like severe, but just noticeable.
I mean, one thing I was thinking about what you said a minute ago was time as well with the book. When you are sitting with a novel, you feel bad that you have to reread a paragraph. You feel like, oh, I didn't get it, or I'm having trouble, I'm struggling to get through this. Whereas I think with a comic, there's a inherent reward with the time spent by looking at it longer and spending time kind of going over the page in different ways. And if you're in control of how you do that, that's why I mean, I don't want to crap on comicsology, but that movement thing I think might, for me, be tough, because I'm not good with linear. I have ADHD, and I don't do, like, my thoughts sometimes don't work in that nice forward fashion. And I think having the ability to kind of like look again, go back, see the whole thing, you know, and you could do that with comicsology, but in the hand, you can kind of like sit with it more. And there's a benefit by sitting longer. And I think a novel, it's like stressful when you have to sit longer because it's so much, you know?
Right.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm in the phase of release of responsibility with the graphic novel and my novel that I use. So we use Reclaiming Our Stories, which is the text that City College
Oh yeah,
developed,
right.
personal narratives from students about their experiences. And so that release of responsibility with both novels, like we read in class sometimes to analyze deeper concepts, but usually students are doing the work on their own
Oh
to
yeah,
develop essays. And
yeah,
so that release of responsibility forces their hand. It forces them to, they can't BS me. They actually have to read it and work through the prompt in order to show that they understood the reading. And when they can't understand the reading, then that gives us an opportunity to have a conference about why not. In most cases, in some cases, students may have an undiagnosed disability and may need DSPS help, but it's always a great opportunity to point out that, like, no, you're not a weak reader, or you're not reading slowly. It's just, you just read longer than others. You may need to find a quieter space. Like, it gives me an opportunity to have a conversation with them about what they're doing.
right.
So I haven't really found that, like, the excitement factor in either of the texts is different,
Hmm.
just because the way the texts in my course are assigned side by side, along with me assisting them some of the way through, makes them feel as if I am capable of doing all, right? Like they can do the graphic novel, but they also can read denser texts, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, I don't think it's like. I mean, I don't see it as maybe they can't do it at all. It's just I think maybe in our Zoom discussions there seems to be more excitement about like the graphic novel. Not that like the novel falls flat necessarily, or that they aren't getting it. Just there is that excitement about the graphic novel.
I know why students might feel that way for me is because I'm super
Yeah,
excited.
yeah, I think that's it too. I'm like, man, I just want to do comics the whole time. Let's just do
Yeah,
that.
if I could just do it the whole time. I think it's a partially it's my
Yeah,
excitement for the comic book,
that's
right?
probably what I was circling around in my brain, but now I'm like, yeah, that's it. That's it right there.
Yeah, I teach dystopian literature in my 200 level class, and so by the time I use, depending on which graphic novel I'm using, but sometimes I use The Walking Dead.
Oh, see, I was gonna guess in your post on Google
Yeah,
Docs, I was like, is it Fahrenheit 451? But Walking Dead is so much better.
yeah. Well, I use it because we studied the genre really intensely, and we read short stories and plays and novels, and so then I try and push them with this one to make a case for, is it dystopian or is it horror, or does it better fit in some other genre? And so we really kind of take a crack at it that way. Um, and so they have enthusiasm, I think, by that point in the semester for the genre. And so they're really enjoying the variety of texts. And when the graphic novel, or the trade paperback, probably be more accurate, comes at them, it's kind of like the novelty of it in the context of all those other works that we've studied, but they also are using this very familiar set of characteristics of dystopian literature to approach it,
Yeah.
and so yeah, it's just I think they really enjoy it.
And
In
you
that,
alternate that with what other dystopian?
so I also use. Oh, hold on one second. One of my kids is coming out. Oh, okay. I use V for Vendetta.
Oh, nice.
That's what I was thinking. That was my guess in
Yeah,
the beginning.
nice.
Yeah.
Is what I thought most people would guess. So I primarily use those two kind of off and on for the dystopian literature class. And the other one that I really want to use, but I haven't used yet, is Here. It's by Richard Maguire, and it came out 4 or 5, gosh, I don't even know how many years ago now. But it takes place all in a single setting, and it's like just interspersed kind of like images of the same setting over like millions of years, and it kind of just like, this is it. And it has like, it deals with like all these different topics, but very kind of like subtly, and looks at the idea of place and how like place changes. And like some of the events it covers are like historical events that are real, but then some of it are like assumptions about like what will it look like
Oh,
in
wow.
30, 35 million years or something. And so it has like, like climate change overtones in it, but also like what do we understand about our own history and things like that. But there's very, very, very little dialogue or writing in it. It's almost entirely image based,
Oh, wow.
which is pretty
With
interesting.
big spreads, like 2 double-page spreads.
Yep. And then there's like different storylines that like pop up again. It's like it's not linear at all. And so these different elements from like the 1950s or like the 1800s or like the 1300s, all in this one space in East Coast of America. You could kind of follow them and find some thread of narrative there, but also they're meant to be like juxtaposed against these other ones that they're set into, that they're not necessarily directly related to, but what's it trying to get you to see. It's pretty interesting. I've read it a couple times, and I've definitely nowhere near comprehending everything that there is to be comprehended there.
I mean, I think I want to lean into what we said before, is that sometimes our students make sense of the graphic novels that seem a little more like, I use Artists Against Police Brutality, thanks to Aaron, who worked with the illustrious John Jennings. I was able to
Just
find
met him a couple times.
met him a couple times, but I found APB, which talks all about police brutality, and they do it throughout the text through not only graphic novel, but poetry and short story. And I use it in my 50 course. And it gives my 50 students so much exposure to the different ways writers and artists create, but also exposes them to a lot of the social issues they're seeing right now. And when I first selected the book, I like read it really quick, and I'm like, I'm going to use this for 50 and see where it goes. And my students, my last semester using it, made so much more sense of the book than I did sitting down and reading it for one summer. Like they have like really latched into some of the ideas. And so I think that one of the beauties of graphic novels and comic books is that we can lean on our students to make sense of what we may be struggling to make sense of. And so I'm going to encourage you, Jason, like just throw it at them and see what they come up with, and see what they say, like, because they might develop greater ideas than I think we could sitting and analyzing the text for hours and hours.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. I'm going to probably use it in my 100 class, where I do human ecology as a theme. And so we study climate change, all kinds of other things. And I'm kicking around breaking them into groups and having them follow or read specific threads of the story and try to map it and make sense of these particular strains.
I have had great success doing just that with all of the texts I use. Artists Against Police Brutality, Yummy. If anybody's familiar with Yummy, The Last Days of a Southside Shorty. True story of Robert Yummy Sandifer, who in the 1990s was a 11-year-old kid who accidentally shoots a community member because he wants to be a member of the gang. And as a result, he ends up on the cover of Time magazine, where they have the like image of was it Too Young to Kill, Too Young
like
to
super
Die?
predator kind of.
Yeah, like he's a super predator. Like they image him like that, and it almost like convicts him in the court of public opinion
Sure.
long before he's even caught. And so the story kind of follows it's more so historical nonfiction, where it follows the shooting and then the aftermath of that shooting, including him being on the cover of Time magazine. And students really latch onto it because, you know, they see Yummy not only in themselves, but in the people who live around them. And just like seeing this as like, wow, this really happened. And the graphic novel illustrates it for me so perfectly. You know, it's just it's a sad story, but it also identifies a lot of what we're experiencing today. And I think that's what the beauty of everything all of us are using does. It identifies the issues that we face time and time again.
Yeah, I think that's a key too, right? Is having like we were all saying, it could, there's so much out there, but it kind of has to have some maybe resonance to now. I think that it helps, even though Watchmen's from the 80s, right? It's like super relevant. And then there's
It's like post 9/11 world. It's
Yeah.
it's very
Seems just like it, right?
it is all over the place today. Yeah.
and you guys, did you watch the HBO series?
Mhm.
Which is
If
like,
I could
man,
effectively teach a TV show, if everyone had
Yeah.
access,
that's amazing.
that'd be cool. That'd be a good one to analyze.
That was
But, yeah.
incredible.
That was actually going to be my next question for those of you like Jason. You teach Walking Dead as well. Uh, what role or like does like the television show or the popularity, the pop culture of like Walking Dead assist you, right, in teaching the text? Because students come with some sort of background knowledge, even though I know that like the writer of Walking Dead has explicitly said that like the TV show very much differs, and as a reader of the comic graphic novel and comic book, that it differs so much. Like, does it assist you, or do you feel like it hurts you more so?
It depends on the work. Sometimes, if I want to cram in more study of the genre, but I don't have time to, give them more things to read because it's just not practical. There are some really good adaptations of works, like The Road has a really good adaptation, which is a great dystopian novel.
I love that book.
If you can't get to it, then sometimes I'll use the adaptations and say, hey, watch this. We'll talk about it in relation to these other things you've been reading. But sometimes, mostly, it's kind of a drag when students try and use it instead of doing the reading, which happens. Like we read The Handmaid's Tale, which is excellent, but kind of hard. And there's that excellent Hulu series that adapts it, but it's not the same. It's not.
Yeah.
It uses elements of the novel, and it actually uses elements from her sequel, which came out 2 years ago, but it's not the same. And so it depends. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes not very helpful. It really depends on the work.
My wondering was based off like my use of Cliff Notes, or like, from college, right? Like how we often look for the cheat code to doing things, and that's not really, it's not the same. You know what I mean? Like you can't bypass the reading. And our students do try to do that. They'll watch TV or say, oh no, I just watched this about it, and like
Right.
It's not the same experience.
Actually, the way that it's been most useful is sometimes we'll use, like The Handmaid's Tale was published in 1985. And so watching the series, like that's been updated to reflect some of our current concerns. So it's updated the concerns of the original novel. And so using those in contrast with one another and saying, because dystopian literature is all about like the crisis of the moment and trying to get people to like get kicked out of their apathy and normalizing of those issues. And so looking at like, okay, well, why are these themes shifting or being modified in the adaptation from 2 years ago as compared to the novel of 40 years ago? And those kinds of comparisons are pretty useful and make for good discussion.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I think so.
I imagine the imagery of the handmaids too is like such a visually striking thing to see on the screen, right? It's like,
yeah,
it's probably pretty cool to have that visual kind of. It seemed like pretty iconic for a moment in the short pop culture time span, attention span that we have now, but
right.
it seemed like we were seeing that a lot which is really
Yeah,
really effective.
I wonder because I used, and I know Aaron has used it before too, Miss Marvel, right? And so Kamala Khan, her show's going to be on Disney Plus this
Right.
pretty soon here, right? And so how will that differ, right? Like what will we see? Whereas, you know, Miss Marvel was written what 10 years ago with G. Willow Wilson, I think.
2014, 13,
Yeah, right.
I think. Yeah.
It's been a while, right? And so relations in that community have changed now versus then, whether better or worse. And how will the show depict that differently for a new community of watchers, right? Like, because Disney Plus is still new, so they can't be as risque as, you know, say Netflix, right? Like, and
Right.
so I'm interested to see how that will change or shape the way they show the show versus the graphic novel, right?
Yeah, it's like it seems to be their approach to kind of cherry pick things and then make a new stew out of it. At least, like what was you? Aaron emailed about Falcon and Winter Soldier, which drew from so many storylines, and it was kind of, I thought,
Yeah.
effectively in the, you know, because I mean maybe some of it the deeper nerds want to see, like, you know, well actually no, I don't think so. I think, like, for instance, The Watchmen, the movie was such a failure to me, in my opinion, because it
Yeah.
was such an attempt to exactly recreate the comic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that just, you know, you can't really. It's like such a meditation on the form itself that, like, to try and transition that to a film. But the MCU is, I thought, smarter in that they like remix things and make it like tonally very true to the comics, but telling you new stories that don't need all that continuity and knowledge of the characters. But
Yeah. That was a cool. I don't want to talk about that show too much if people haven't seen it, but that really was a cool,
no spoilers.
cool version of Captain America, the Captain America series, kind of as it would play out. So that was nice. Yeah.
That's my big stance in the use of graphic novels and comic books is that so many of our students come with a tremendous amount of background knowledge now, right? Because there's a Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Like, and so that gives many of our students a background that maybe even 5 years ago they wouldn't have had, right? Like, so they come to our conversations with some base knowledge of what the comic book or graphic novel is supposed to be, and then it leaves it up to us to imply our nerdism on that, right? Like to show them that, hey, no, it's not just like girls in scantily clad outfits. There are topics that deal with our world in these books if you take the time to open them and read, right? And so that's what makes them really interesting, right? Like, it makes them powerful for our kids.
That was one question I had. Like, so the one I'm using is Superman Smashes the Klan, which is dealing with like heavy stuff, but it's very much YA oriented, like younger audience. And Aaron and Jason, I know Watchmen and Walking Dead are very graphic in terms of like the brutality against others, or, you know, like physical violence, sexual violence
against women. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, like, just as a like how do you approach that? Because I don't want to only teach, you know, like one type of thing. I want to feel like, oh, this is really compelling and important, and I think other people would respond to it. But just kind of curious how you both approach that.
I mean, in Watchmen, in Alan Moore stuff specifically, I think we have to do a lot of work to depower him, and he's great, but it's also like there are a lot of problems. And I introduced a book as basically like, I love this book. I love it, but there's a lot of power in being able to critique the things that we love,
Yeah.
and to nudge at them and pick at them. And if we don't face those things, then we have issues. So like, it's not so much the violence itself that really, I think, college students, I would expect to be able to handle some level of violence, but it's the type of violence. There's a lot of sexual assault. There's a lot of violence against women. The story is often told by a man abusing a woman.
Right.
A major plot point will be illustrated, like in Watchmen, the way like John comes to a realization to save the world by making Lori go through trauma. And like, it's a small detail, but like we point it out and we talk about it. No, making her relive like, her coming to understand about her father and like all the stuff she goes through and her breakdown. He's like, oh, now I get it. Now I'll go save the world. It's okay. Cool. Thank you for showing me this lesson. But I directly confront it. I think you have to, like, I've had so many good papers taking down his treatment of women in the book, and as like a problem with the way female heroes, because the class is about heroes, so their stuff is usually focused on how heroes are treated in media. And that's one of the things that a lot of people bring up is like, this is not a good depiction of heroes, because even if he is groundbreaking in these ways, look at what he does that perpetuates this like societal problem,
Yeah, I like that. And in the, like, especially like superhero comic world, like he's so deified, and it has had a huge impact on the way people tell stories in those worlds. Like, and every comic I've ever, even his early DC work, like before he did Watchmen or Swamp Thing, there's always some violent, like usually rape, in one of his comics. It's like, and especially Watchmen and Killing Joke, like that's a central plot point.
And V,
both of them.
I mean, not rape per se, but like a traumatic experience that a man does to a woman.
Yeah.
For an illustrative purpose,
I mean, there's a bit of that in V for Vendetta as well. I mean, if you think about that arc, the violence, the straight up violence in Walking Dead is part of that, or one of the central points in that work, which is that, there's all these zombies, and that's really problematic, but really people are the people, problem, right? So, that idea that after those first couple weeks, the walkers are still issues, but really the real danger throughout is other people. That's trying to draw your attention to that issue in society as well. And so so that violence, at least, is in that work is pretty discussable in that context, and justifiable in some ways. And so it's like, sorry, the kids are swimming. It's like you could do something with it, right? Instead of it just being kind of like gratuitous or openly problematic. So
yeah. But I was wondering, because you say both of you do that in 200, right? Walking Dead.
Yeah, mine is. Yeah.
And yours is too. Because did you do that consciously? Like, oh wait, give him a maybe chance to get a little seasoned in 100? Or I was just wondering, like, if that was a deliberate choice or just kind of fit what you wanted to do in the class.
For me, it just fit because, like I said, I use it to push their understanding of the genre that we're studying.
Yeah.
And so that actually really helps with the discussion, because it feels like for a lot of students, it's got to be horror. It's horror only. Look at the way this thing moves in this work, and the way the violence is, and it capitalizes on so many of the expectations we have for the horror genre. Yeah. And so it works really well for my purposes.
That's cool. Thanks for that. I just was curious.
My 100's totally different. It wouldn't fit any. I don't really use any comics in that class. I do actually do another interesting layer of using comics is adaptations of existing works, which we already kind of covered. But I do. Mark Maurer is a criminal justice author, and he wrote Race to Incarcerate, and it's about like the prison industrial complex and racism and how it targets Black and brown people specifically. so it's like this academic book, and I use the graphic adaptation of it, which is
Oh,
really
wow.
cool.
Yeah,
And it's
That's
a way
amazing.
like one of the things I do with it is we have students like take this book that is it's sourced because it's written by him, but it's not sourced in the book, and find it. Like go take this information that he presented here and find the kind of more academic-y or approved version of,
Oh,
of
cool.
that source, and
That's super
kind of
cool.
genre blending, but it's it's a way of telling like a sometimes really difficult thing in a way
Mhm.
that's not freed from its emotion,
Right.
where I think a lot of like an academic book might not necessarily have that like emotional layer. Like he'll tell like a story of like a specific individual through like interspersed through kind of the historical arc of what happened and how the prison system became what it was. But he has these like personal touches and personal stories. And I think that's something that's nice about the graphic adaptation.
That's awesome.
Michael, you mind if could you give me sharing ability? I want to show something.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because I think it touches on both what your question and what Jason and Aaron both named, is that, you know, the idea of being able to witness some of these very violent and problematic images gives our students an opportunity not to ignore
Should be
what
good,
has
yeah.
happened, and like really see it for what it is. And I like that's my other piece of like um comicsology exploration, like being able to see it as it happened. So like this is the Freedom Riders coming in and seeing that their bus has been canceled. They're stuck in the bus station, and then you kind of move through until you get to the part where they're stuck. They're sleeping in the bus station. So some of our students can imagine what a bus station might be like, right? Like what riding the Greyhound might be like, even if they've never done it. But then, like when they come to, whether on comicsology or in the text, to this like powerful image of violence, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
that moment where the artist is taking this liberty with like the darkness outside, the power that lies behind the hate that exists in the Confederate flag, and then the KKK and the police officers outside, almost like they're congregating, right?
Yeah.
And that the police aren't really holding them off, but like they're just kind of out there just chilling,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then the people inside feeling that fear of knowing that like they're so close, they can bust in here and like mess us up. And like there's something about the way it is drawn and being able to follow it in that way, and knowing the violence and the results of it, that is powerful for our students, right? Like they can see it now. It's not just me reading it and trying to picture that imagery in my brain. It's actually seeing it take place and knowing the distance that the riders had to ride with like the military over them, the police escort, and then getting to the next town. And my students always write about this portion where they see the violence that happens as the riders get off the bus and see like people arrive to hurt them, right? And a lot of them will touch on the language, of course, right?
Mhm.
And then they always like, this is a big panel, right? Let me escape it. I hope I can. 2 pages, right? They always notice this guy saying, "Come on, Danny." And then like as you turn, you see Danny's violence erupt, right? This little kid who is enacting, racism on a group of people who just want their rights. And seeing it happen, although violent, and then juxtaposed with Aretha Franklin singing at the Capitol, it's powerful, right?
Yeah.
Like it has an impact on our students and makes them not just read the words, but see the power of the words alongside the image. And I think
Yeah.
there's something in that. Like I don't want to expose them to so many trigger warnings, but Otherwise, they'll just avoid it. They won't
Right.
look at it at all and pretend it doesn't exist. So being able to see what happens in Watchmen and what happens in Walking Dead is so important to who our students are today. They're such visual learners. Like everything they do is visual. It's all kinesthetic as well. And so giving that graphic novel comic book gives them that space to see it and know that this was real. This happened then. This is not made up, right?
That
And Watchmen and Walking Dead give them that feeling of not that it's real, but this could happen, right? This does happen to people, right?
the artist's choices too are just so amazing. Like you said, that silhouette of the KKK and the up against the cops, it immediately brought to mind like the Capitol insurrection, where you saw like selfies with the rioters and the insurrectionists with the cops, and just that. I love what you said about the scale too. Like that's a powerful thing. I think comics does really well when the artist is really firing on all cylinders, is like create the intimacy, right? Where there's these close-ups, like you said, I saw that kid's face and it was just like demonic, right?
Yeah.
As he's enacting that violence. But then it's able to pull back and really linger on that big shot of the bus and the scope of it. That's really cool.
Well, it fits in really well with the dystopian literature because that whole genre is intended to like shake people awake. That's why it's often characterized as so extreme, and like one of the characteristics of that genre is that the calamities or the problems and issues in the works need to affect the everyday lives of everyday people within the context of the work. And so that also is very intentional. And so you look at the art that you shared with us, and that's definitely got that element to it, and it's so that we can associate with it and better kind of understand the things that we're supposed to see in the work. And so yeah, you get that kind of punch from the stuff in or the panels in Walking Dead. But that aspect of it just being like it could be anybody starts to push them and say, well, is it horror, or does it start to bridge the gap and come over and be and fit our dystopian literature as we understand it? So
Has it been different facing examining that genre this semester and last semester, like in the midst of the pandemic? Does it feel like
actually I was teaching 201 on the ground in spring 2020, and it was totally surreal to switch online for this pandemic. And the students, we would joke about like, well, now we're living some elements of what we've been studying, but it also gave this kind of intense, crazy backdrop to these works. And I sometimes thought like, well, is this next thing we're going to read be the last straw for them this week? Because it's
right? It's
so
like piling up on
pressure inducing.
yeah.
You make me think. I'm so excited I didn't teach Parable of the Sower because
I love that book.
I haven't even finished it because it's
Oh
so
my God,
it's
that's amazing.
It's way too close to what's
And
going
it's
on.
right where we are too. Like
It's today.
Right?
That's the
So-
future. That's the
and
future.
I was gonna teach it. And I was like,
How-
maybe not this semester.
the only thing I think,
Fire.
but I don't think Washington or Oregon are going to be the safety spots because they're dealing with their own calamities.
Yeah.
And like full on white supremacists, like
Yeah.
takeovers of the eastern parts of those states.
My
I
brother
mean,
lives in Portland. He's lived there, gosh, like almost 30 years now, I think. But he's saying it's like living in a dystopian city right now because of the aftermath of the riots and like increased police presence and
they are very, very violently repressive as
Yeah.
like an anti-riot task force there.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, that book is insanely good
Yeah.
and prophetic.
So, in the interest of the
Yeah, we
time,
gotta wrap it
or
up.
it's a lot
Yeah.
of us. I'm looking at the pillars that make up online writing. I think we're all in the space of demonstrating equity and
Yeah.
practicing culturally sustaining pedagogy. You know, like graphic novels and comic books do that. No matter which one you're choosing, it gives students that space to, you know, look at varied modes of reading and writing and research skills, supporting them. Just in a Hispanic Serving Institute, our prompts, and I'm hoping next time we'll be able to jump into some of the assignments that we do. I'm sure fit both equitable practices or could, and then it's interactive, man. Like I love that, and I find that it's a lot of my young women who, some of them are really into comic books. You would be shocked by, because I'm in the comic book store all the time and there's not a lot of women there, right? But a lot of our young ladies are really into comic books today. But also, even if they're not, the way they engage with them in the classroom is phenomenal for me. Like there are not many female characters in March, Yummy, or Artists Against Police Brutality, but those that are, students seem, my young women seem to gravitate toward these characters that want more characters like them, so that they can see themselves doing activism and working strongly in that area. And so that's the space that I truly do love. But I think we're in that kind of pillar of demonstrating equity and practicing culturally sustaining pedagogy.
Yeah, I think that fits.
And I also think that we talked today a lot about the collaboration, like the student to student stuff, like using the comic to like get to, you know, different parts of conversation and getting students to work together. I mean, that's one I want to work on a little bit. I don't know, because that's with the online change, that's been hard. Like it's easy to put people in a group and have the book in the middle, or all of them have a book and they just start looking at panels and talking about them. But it's hard to do that in an asynchronous discussion.
Right.
I mean,
you make me think. This semester I did a lot with poetry and group work, where students were creating their own Google slide around the poetry that we're reading. I wonder if I apply that same thinking to graphic novels and comic books, if students would produce like Google Slides presentations that incorporate the panels and dig deeper into concepts from our content. And I've never thought to play that card with them, but I wonder if I could design something to make them do just that, right? Examining panels as a group and having deeper and meaningful conversations about specific panels, right?
Totally. Yeah. Well, I think we got a lot to talk about. I got to get going, but when do we want to meet again? Next week? 2 weeks?
Curry sent out an email about the second week meeting.
Okay.
Would it be easier if we just said the same time next week?
Yeah, let's just do that.
Like, plug it in. Does that work for you, Jason and Aaron, as well?
Totally.
Probably. Next week we are minor things. I have like several little things happening on Thursday, but I probably can. If I have to pop in and out or halfway or something, that's fine. So
cool.
Perfect.
All right, guys, that was a lot of fun. Thanks.
This has been awesome. Thank you all for being here.
Can't believe it's work.
Well, we'll make sure Megan gets the recording as well, and
I'll download it right now. All right, great talking to you guys. See you soon. See you next week.